Ja, gleich wird es hier losgehen. Aber vielleicht begrüße ich erstmal alle, die da draußen sind und sich eingeschaltet haben für den heutigen KunstBewusst-Vortrag der Freunde des Wallraf-Richartz-Museums und des Museum Ludwig. Ja, ich melde mich hier gerade aus meinem Büro im Wallraf und bin ganz froh, dass wir zu den aktuellen Bedingungen einen KunstBewusst-Vortrag, der seit wirklich vielen Monaten, ich glaube seit einem halben Jahr eigentlich geplant ist, durchführen können mit einer Referentin eigentlich, Cara Courage, die aus London heute gekommen wäre, von der Tate zu uns gesprochen hätte, zu Learning Together, Tate Exchange and Co-Creation. Und klar, Corona hat uns einen Strich durch die Rechnung gemacht. Cara kann leider nicht bei uns sein und so haben wir umgeschwenkt und beschlossen, ein Zoom-Webinar zu machen und das eben live zu streamen. Und bis heute Mittag sah das alles gut aus und dann kam Internetstörung bei Cara Courage dazwischen und alles sah aus, als ob es komplett gekippt werden müsste, aber Cara war sehr erfindungsreich und hat ihren Vortrag einfach heute schon für euch alle gefilmt da draußen und ist wirklich untröstlich und entschuldigt sich und bittet wirklich um Entschuldigung dafür, dass dieses Internet heute so instabil war, aber weder sie noch wir wollten heute riskieren, sozusagen nicht live diesen Vortrag durchziehen zu können und somit hat sie das Ganze für uns aufgenommen. Ja, an meiner Seite oder ein Bild neben mir ist hoffentlich zu sehen Janice Mitchell, Kuratorin der Ausstellung Hier und Jetzt, Mapping the Collection im Museum Ludwig. Und ja, ihrer Einladung haben wir sozusagen zu verdanken, dass Cara Courage heute einen Vortrag für uns aufgezeichnet hat. Und so möchte ich an dieser Stelle eigentlich an Janice Mitchell direkt übergeben und einfach nur euch da draußen darauf aufmerksam machen, dass wir natürlich versuchen, unsere Programme, unsere Vortragsreihen, Kunstspätis etc. auch in diesen schwierigen Zeiten realisieren zu können. Und von daher, wenn eben alles geschlossen ist und wir uns nicht vis-à-vis versammeln dürfen, dann machen wir das eben im Internet. Dann treffen wir uns hier in diesen Bereichen und ich hoffe, es macht euch trotzdem Freude. An dieser Stelle vielen Dank fürs Einschalten, fürs Dabeisein und ich übergebe an Janice Mitchell.
Ja, ich hoffe, man sieht mich.
Ja.
Super. Ja, ich begrüße auch nochmal alle, die jetzt hier zugeschaltet haben und auch auf YouTube zugeschaltet haben. Diese Talk ist zusammengekommen durch die Neupräsentation der Gegenwartssammlung im Untergeschoss des Museums Ludwigs, die ich zusammen mit Kuratorin Barbara Engelbach gestaltet habe. Und der Schwerpunkt dieser Neupräsentation liegt auf den Gedanken des amerikanischen Philosophen John Dewey. John Dewey hat vor allem zu Erziehung, Demokratie und Kunst geschrieben und er hat diese drei Themen als verbunden verstanden, als etwas, was man im Kollektiv tut, als Dinge, man lernt im Kollektiv, man macht Erfahrungen zusammen, man arbeitet zusammen und kommt gemeinsam zu Lösungen. Und in diesem Kontext versteht er eben Kunst und Erziehung als ein integraler Aspekt und sieht beide als wichtige Fundamente, um an Teil einer demokratischen Gesellschaft teilhaben zu können und sich auch aktiv in diese Gesellschaft einbringen zu können. Ich werde jetzt ins Englische switchen, weil ich das so ursprünglich geplant hatte, da das Format ja anders sein sollte, aber ich hoffe, das ist für alle in Ordnung. Cara Courage ist Head of Tate Exchange und das war auch der ausschlaggebende Grund, sie einzuladen. Und genau, ich mache jetzt einfach mal auf Englisch weiter. So, created in 2016, Tate Exchange is a platform for socially engaged art. It is a space for everyone to debate and reflect upon contemporary topics and ideas, to get actively involved, think through doing, and to make a difference. It's background is to question the role of art in society and the issues that shape the world today, but to also reflect on how society impacts art. Each year at Tate Exchange focuses on a specific theme and explores ideas around education, identity, well-being, migration, economics, space, or representation. The current theme is the topic of love. And as part of its program, Tate Exchange brings together artists, local organizations, and initiatives from the United Kingdom in a participatory, community-led exchange of ideas and discussions that take the form of workshops, talks, performances, and other forms of events that are free and open to the public. Tate Exchange also works with a range of organizations and initiatives such as the Museum of Homelessness, Latin American Women's Aid, Merseyside Youth Association in Liverpool, the Feminist Library, or BBZ Collective, a queer Black activist collective from South London. But it also partners with educational institutions across the United Kingdom, as well as other art institutions, and these have included Kettle's Yard in Cambridge, the University of Brighton, the University of Westminster, or the University of the Arts London. And also it works with internationally renowned artists, inviting them to be part of this program. And artists in the past have included Rax Media Collective, Christine Sun Kim, Tanya Bruguera, or Marvin Gaye Chetwynd. And the workshops and programs are always a collaboration of the artists invited, or the collectives, or universities, or schools invited, who then shape the program presented to the public, and all events are always free and open to the public. Cara Courage has been the head of Tate Exchange since 2018. She's a cultural practitioner and curator whose work and research focuses on socially engaged art and art in the public realm, as well as placemaking and activism within the cultural sector. She publishes and speaks internationally on these topics. Cara is also author of the books Arts and Place, Arts, the Urban and Social Practice, published in 2017, and the co-editor of Creative Placemaking and Beyond, published in 2018, and both were published by Routledge. Cara understands the arts as having a transformative effect in society, viewing them as a means to talk across difference and through our lived experience. And I hope you guys will enjoy her talk.
And then I will talk about a project that kind of puts all of that into action, really, called Tate Neighbors. And I will close with where this has taken me with some of my thinking around the role of the museum, a possible sort of way in to think about the role of the museum. So many museums questioning, reflecting on their civic role, the role perhaps around mutual aid. And I'll close on that. I'll also close on a question back to you. I'm really sorry I can't be with you in person, as it were. My internet connection today is not working in my favour, so we thought it better that I record this presentation so at least you can get everything. So when you think of Tate, you might think of the blockbuster shows that we've had. You might also think of some of the really big events and art interventions we've had, that something particularly like the Turbine Hall gives us the affordance to do, which is fantastic, absolutely great. But it's really important to really underline that really since day one that Tate Modern opened, and particularly also then with the Blavatnik building opening in 2016, learning has really been at the heart of everything that. So this is Tate's overall aim: to generate new ways of learning about art, to precipitate conversations about life. It's there specifically looking at reaching wider audiences, promoting positive change, promoting a dialogue and engagement with contemporary cultural and artistic life. And this is a publication, this is available on the Tate website, called 10 Years in the Making. It was written by our Director of Learning and Research, Anna Cutler, and it gives a really beautiful narrative about the journey that Tate has been on, actually really in the last 10, 15, sort of 20 years, in the development of what we have now as our learning pedagogy that we call creative learning. And it gives a consideration to what needs to be in place for an institution to lay the foundations for this kind of approach. I'll step you through now some images from this publication by way of an explanation into how we came to this. So it was around 10-15 years ago now that Tate started to review our learning programme. We wanted to get an idea of where Tate was in relation to others in the sector and to consider what learning might mean also in the new, then to be built extension at Tate Modern. We were asking questions about what we were trying to achieve, what we were doing and how we were going to go about this, what we were doing in the context then of learning with the public in that as well, learning across the institution as a whole, and then, you know, our part then within the wider museums ecology as well. And we found that there was a lot to do, actually, that this actually afforded us a really big opportunity to really step up our game in terms of our learning offer to people. So at that time, we committed to a journey of research and analysis, learning from others, a gap analysis as well to make the necessary improvements and changes, developments that we saw ahead of us. And we accepted from the start also that we would make mistakes and that we would need to learn from criticism in order to change, and that we had to also be very transparent in our intent as well. What we needed to do first was to create a vision for what we were doing, and to do this we realised we needed to have the right staff in place to make, you know, in our case we put in a head of research and practice who could explore, evaluate and shape what was happening across the sector, as well as draw out the strengths for us and the qualities in the practice that we had already at Tate. And also a head of programmes and resources who could support the teams in their work as well. We needed to talk to our board and trustees to get their institutional support and their insight as well. And the same also for those in our learning team, so that they could really, so that they knew their voices were being heard, and then you could see where their input was actually then translating into the vision that we were then going to deliver on. And this is the 5-stage process that we followed, and we still follow now, really. Identifying values, asking how we manifest those in what we do, asking what processes need to be in place for them, how we evaluate them, and how we apply that as learning to develop what we do. Sorry, I'm going to have to take a sip of water. And I need to underline here that this is a continuous process for us. So we still very much go back to lean on those 5 stages in planning what we're doing across all that we do. And as a team, we facilitate ways of working that creates the time and the space, drawing and alongside our programme to understand the what, why, where, who, how, the impact that it has, what works and what doesn't, and then very importantly, what do we do next? How do we learn from this to inform what we're doing next? And this is a practice-led research process for us, and actually that is the approach really of the whole of the learning department, you know, the learning team at Tate. And we of course test what we do with the public and fold that learning back then into what we do next. So after the creation of the vision, we then look to create a set of values that would help inform the programmes and help us translate that vision into practice, and that we could then also usefully evaluate from as well. And behind this whole process lay several key ideas, and this has really helped translate into some of the values that we're holding as well. So we're interested in innovation and new models of production and practice to our programming, all that are relevant to contemporary life, the lived experience that we have now. That this is developed from the art that the institution holds. We hold the nation's art collection on behalf of the public. And of course, in these artwork contains ideas, processes and practices that offer a really rich learning potential. We aim to be inclusive and work with equity, and to also extend our work beyond those who already have access and engagement with art. And we believe in creating positive change with the public in our programme to encourage many different ways of engaging with art socially, emotionally, intellectually and aesthetically and so on. And that we aim and feel it a real responsibility for us as a national institution for the UK to make a positive contribution or difference in our contemporary cultural life and with our public as well. And there's a lot to unpack in what I've shared with you so far, but I think going through you'll see how we've applied that into our practice. So this whole journey and these values and vision led us then to create the pedagogy that we call creative learning. In this shift, it is part of the shift of museum practice globally, actually, in the last 10 years or so, from something that was passive to something that's participative, something that was very standardised to something that becomes very personalised for that learner, and from the museum as being a place, rather than of transmitting information, to being a space where knowledge is co-created. And so this demands, of course, a plural voice, not a single voice, through what we do, and also an understanding it's not necessarily what you know, but how you use that knowledge that's really important. And for us, really, again, at the heart of this is about public access to the building, to the collection, and also to the centres of knowledge that we have within Tate as well, and to facilitate that knowledge exchange between us and the public, the artist, etc. And this is what we have settled on to mean as creative learning to us. So we understand it as something, as learning, creative learning as being able to determine problems and solve them, to solve them for oneself, using various cognitive skills and processes to do that, an art process can afford, and using a practice and a process as much as any art object to facilitate that. And the key features of creative learning are really defined in terms of able to, yes, determine problems for oneself, actively solve them, to use your imagination, to use divergent thinking, emotional intelligence. There's a balance of skills and challenge in this as well, and risk-taking and refinement of the task, and then pursuit of a valued goal to this as well. And of course, the arts are really good at facilitating and enabling this as a form of learning, because that's what's really enveloped, that's what's so integral to the process of an artist. It really embodies that process of creative learning in and of itself. And when this is put into action, we find that these are the outcomes. There's an enjoyment in learning, and learning becomes very learner-led. There's an implicit and explicit permission to challenge the already known, and there is a lot of risk-taking in that. There's flexibility and contingency, creative and critical thinking, and invitation to new skills and ideas. There are different forms of social relationships, new forms of social, emotional, physical, intellectual development as well. And this type of thinking and activity, we soon realised actually to really hone in on this, to really excel at this, to really get into this, it needed a different kind of space and a whole different way of operating actually, of thinking, of making and of doing. And that's where for Tate Exchange came in. Welcome to Tate Exchange. When I'm not here, I'm not in Tate Exchange at the moment. I'm in my home office in Brighton during the second lockdown in the UK. but I'm going to show you some photos of the space. At its broad mission, Tate Exchange, it's a space where art and society meet. It's a place that is an open experiment. We didn't know what was going to work, what was going to happen, what we were going to learn from Tate Exchange once we opened it. But we're on a mission to explore what the role of art in society is and what happens when those two things, in a very intentional way, begin to. This is our curatorial statement. I'm not going to read it all out now, but it does point to some really key things for us. The question behind that mission that we have: how can art make a difference to people's lives and to society? This is a co-created space. We work with a set of partners that we call associates that are up and down the UK and in fact international. And they are partners across the arts, as you may well expect, but also from education, from early years through to postdoc, from health and well-being, and that does include, for example, a national health, an NHS trust, and also then to those which, in a very broad term, we would call community development. So those organisations that use an arts process to work with communities of place, to untangle the issues of that place, to make improvements to that place. And that's actually very much at intersects of my own research, which is of placemaking and the arts in placemaking as well. And the golden thread for all of those is that they use an arts process to do it. So even for a university where we might work with the philosophy department or the maths or engineering departments, again, there is a creative approach that they're bringing. They bring their questions, they bring their communities into the space of Tate Exchange, and they have it as a blank sheet of paper, really. And from that to then engage in a co-creating process with the public and to engage in a dialogue with the public as well. Our values: trust, respect, trust, generosity and risk. These are values that we live every day. These aren't values that we make and they just then sit somewhere on a shelf collecting dust. We put this through everything that we do: how we work as a team, how we work with our associates, and the journey that we ask the public, or we invite the public to go on with us as well. Our aims, and I must say, in the current situation we're in, these aims are changing. This is a good time to look at what we're doing and the purpose and where our need is at the moment. And not that these aims will be, the aims that you see in front of you now will be thrown out, but they will change. There is a common space. We have a physical space. We have a digital space. We are here to engender that deeper relationship with art. It's very key for us that we are working with all publics, and actually a lot of the publics that we work with come from communities whose voices aren't necessarily foregrounded in society, let alone in normative, museum practice. And it's really important to us that when you step into the space of Tate Exchange, whether that be in person, that's what's happening at the moment though, or in a digital space, that you have the opportunity there, if you so wish, to make a really active contribution. Our principles, as I've just said, to invite and enable the audience to become collaborators and to shape what we do, that we do really live and breathe those values that we have. We work to a theme every year. This year's theme is love. Others have been exchange, funnily enough, being called Tate Exchange. We've looked at production and movement, quite big overarching themes that have allowed, precipitated our associates to come in and to interpret that in a very wide way. We work particularly with diverse audiences, as clunky a term as that is. And that's something which we take a great care in and really learn from others in developing our own practice on that. And again, to explore new ways of thinking about art, society, the role of the museum, and its relationship with the public as well. So our core space is homed at Tate Modern in London. It's on the 5th floor of the Blavatnik building, this extension to Tate Modern that you can see on the left here. And it's when you walk up to this building, it's massive. You know, Tate Modern is a very, very big building, and it may be every inch sort of the global art museum experience that our usual 6 million visitors a year think a visit to Tate Modern might be. When you come into the Blavatnik building where we're housed, there's the restaurant on one side, there's a shop on the other. Again, an experience that would be very common to other museum experiences too, of course. When you come up to level 5 to Tate Exchange, this is the welcome that you get. This is our welcome assistant, Adiola, who has a particular magic and skill in inviting people to cross the threshold of Tate Exchange. So once you've been for your walk around Tate Modern and you've walked the miles and miles and miles of gallery, exhibition and display work that we have, and even if you've never been to a museum before, it doesn't take long for you to sort of see a sort of etiquette that's happening in those spaces, and you then have a sort of expectation about how you can be in those spaces. When you come to Tate Exchange, it could be really noisy and really messy, and there could be all sorts of different things happening in that space. And it's hard to get people to cross over the threshold of an art space. And it's hard to perhaps get people to cross over the threshold of Tate Exchange. We have a lot of people who go, oh, I've never done art. I haven't done art since I was at school, when they see that there may be a making activity happening there. And Adiola is the great one that says, no, just come in, come and have a cup of tea, have a seat, you don't need to do anything. And then we find usually then 3 hours later, somebody's been involved in being part of a social sculpture, or they've helped create tapestry banners for a local community procession or parade or something like that. And we get a lot of people coming back to Tate Exchange week in, week out, and Adiola remembers them all by name. They know she knows where they've been on holiday, how their kids are doing, so on and so forth. And she really does work some very special magic there at Tate Exchange. And this is what we look like in the before times, before COVID. This is how the Tate Exchange space was working. It's a very big space, as you can see. That's only half of it in that image there. That is can be used. We've used it for club nights and for live gigs, which have been noisy and joyful. Equally, we've used it for very quiet moments, very contemplative moments, and actually for a space that is so big, it is possible to create that smaller conversation, that more intimate conversation. And actually, even though when I said earlier about sort of the passive learning with museum and changing that, actually just to sit back and listen is a really important thing. There's a lot of Tate Exchange is about storytelling. You hear other people's stories and you tell your own in response, and you need different textures and tenures to be able to do that. We work with people of all ages as well, and actually we've come to develop quite a specialism with creative aging practices too. We're really proud of, and there's a lot of intergenerational conversation that happens at Tate Exchange too. And of course, when you come into the space, it might look really messy or chaotic, but actually it's a practice that is really rigorously thought out. And we can trace this type of practice back through the community arts practice of the sort of 60s through to 80s, which is still happening, but you may hear some now call it a social practice art, and there's a difference between the two. But you can also trace it back to Prou and Dadaism and Surrealism and so on and so forth. So there's a real, it looks like this, and it is great fun, but there's a really, really well thought out and rigorous intent behind every activity that will happen at Tate Exchange. We are a space for asking questions, and we are a space for debate and discussion. And we do our best to create a safe space for people to come in and to ask questions, to be heard, and to not be judged on either count. but also it's a bold space. So we ask very difficult questions as well, and we don't want to duck away from that either. And this is an example of a sort of typical question that you might have as part of a Tate Exchange programme, and a question that is prompting this interrogation between arts and society, and doing that with the public. And we've come to understand quite a lot of what our practice is of something which is called mattering. And we take this actually from one of our associates called Flourishing Lives. They are an umbrella organisation, arts organisation in London, that join up some 400 different groups and care homes of people that work with older people, so those over 55. And their approach to mattering is one that we've really taken to heart. So when we feel, the feeling to be that you matter is something fundamentally fundamental to our self-esteem and our sense of well-being, but also to then, of course, being part of society, and to our health, our happiness, and our longevity as well. And mattering is really anchored in the practice of flourishing lives, by asking two very simple questions. How do you feel you matter? And how does it feel when somebody really listens to you? And I want you to hold on to this, because it's something they'll come back to towards the end of our talk as well. But that is something that we've really, as I said, really taken to heart at Tate Exchange. And it's something, again, that really anchors the practice that we've been very lucky. We opened in 2016 with the opening of the Verbreitung building extension at Tate Modern. And we've been very lucky to have the funding to do some very in-depth evaluation. And I'm not going to go into sort of deep methodology necessarily, but I will go into what we've learned from it, and some of the reflections that people have had come back to us. So, but very quickly though, the methods that we use, we have reports written after events, we do a daily report and debrief with whatever team is on the floor at that time. We count the numbers of people coming in into the space and online as well. We have a team of evaluator participants who are people that are with us for a year and will go to varying different Tate Exchange programs and give us their sort of first person response to what's been happening. And those are formed of artists and young people. We have evaluation forums as well, where we gather those associates that have programmed over a period of say 3 months and have a conversation around how it went and see what surfaces for them. And we also we use something called Sphere Insights, which is quite a metrics based what would the word be, evaluation mechanism mode that we have access to at Tate. But what we've learned has been really heartening and informs, of course, what we do going forward. We had a focus on the participant experience in our first year, and we found from that through an involvement, a collaboration, a co-creation with the Tate Exchange programme, that the public participants and also the community participants, their perception of art and of the theme that we were working to that year had changed. We were seeing that people were themselves seeing more of how they can put their thinking into action and affect change in their own lives in different ways. We were seeing that people feel they have a voice at Tate Exchange and that this is very empowering for them, a very empowering experience for them. And the key point also is, well, it got them thinking very differently about Tate and about what Tate can do, what Tate should be doing, and the role of Tate as well for them individually and in society. We learned about what exemplifies a best practice for a Tate Exchange programme, and we're learning this anew actually as we have a digital first programme at the moment because of the pandemic and because of lockdown. We've learned that the welcome is key, so going back to Adiola, our welcome assistant, her job is absolutely essential. but it's also about how people are, and all the different things that would be going on at Tate Exchange, how they're welcomed into each of those activities or installations or interventions. Inclusivity and accessibility, we've set quite a high bar for this. We set a very high bar for this at Tate Exchange. And actually this has become really embedded in our practice. A lot of our associates, not just at Tate Exchange, but where they work as well. And at the simplest level, as a space for conversation, Tate Exchange, we found, is a place where people are heard and that they matter. And this is something that's really important to bed into the programmes. That there's always the opportunity for that person to be heard and for their sense of that they matter. And then key learning from the evaluation in whole, in general. Sorry, another sip of water. What we do hinges on human connection, and it was very powerful to have it written down like that, because we intuitively knew it, and it was something that came up from our evaluation very big. It's our essential ingredient, is the human connection, and that is, that makes the success of every programme. Inclusivity for us, and again, that we don't necessarily use that word any longer, but we do work with communities that are underrepresented, and they have this space to do whatever they want in. They invite their extended community into the gallery as well. And as the events are designed to be participatory and of social practice, Tate Exchange becomes this place, this platform for conversation and exchange with the wider public. It brings visibility to issues selected by that programming community. In terms of participation, we're able to make a difference in people's lives. The way that we do that is primarily through creating the conditions for participation that leads to those conversations and exchanges between different people, exchanges across difference, and to the reflection that affords on those involved. And we're a change agent. We're seeing a real impact that Tate Exchange and our practices are having on our colleagues and other departments at Tate. And we're having a very healthy exchange around what our practice is, and what Tate can learn from that. In a way, we hold up a mirror to the institution in many ways. And we know that we change the perception of art and the role of art in society as well. When people come into the Tate Exchange space, they become an active participant in art. A physical interaction and participation, an intellectual one, an aesthetic one. And it's a co-produced practice. And it helps people sort of see, have a broader conception of art, and it helps see themselves actually in a very different creative role than they may have had before they came into our space. And that's also about what they can create themselves individually, but a role that they may have in creating change in their societies back at home, wherever their home may be. At the end of our second year of evaluation, we began to form this theory of change. And again, I won't go into this in a huge amount of detail. All of this evaluation is available on our website as well. But it was wonderful to see that in the first couple of years, what we were moving towards and beginning to really achieve was making a difference to people's lives. And that's so important to us. That is why we do what we do. In tandem to the evaluation, Tate Exchange has also been set up as a research centre within Tate as well. Tate has equivalent university status in the UK. What makes us different to a university, though, is that we don't award research degrees, but we have that equivalent institutional status. And we noticed that there was a lot of research happening on the Tate Exchange floor. And by forming Tate Exchange into a research centre, it was a way to really galvanise that, and to give it a really its due attention, to really put the spotlight. We have 4 areas of research endeavour with a list of questions, and of course these questions are framed, or they take on a very different pertinence now as we are in a different programming year. So one of those areas around art and artists, what does a Tate Exchange practice look like for an artist? Who is the Tate Exchange artist? The context and affordances of Tate Exchange as a platform and as a space. What do we want to archive in what we're doing? What does it mean to be a partner in this endeavour? How can what we do inform other areas of research within Tate, but also with other museums? The audience and participant experience, you've probably got the idea that that's really important to us now. So what does this co-programming, co-production, curation look like at Tate Exchange? And again, what knowledge of that can we share with others? What does a safe space mean? What does a brave or bold space mean to be, in the context of an art institution as well? And then looking at the audiences, how do we get these audiences across the threshold? How do we then perhaps get them having a larger walk around Tate Modern as well? And then for our own research and evaluation methodologies as well, how are we measuring this success? How can we benchmark this practice? What are we measuring against? How can we make comparisons across what we do with others as well? And then these are the kind of these are the things that people say back to us. And I stumbled over my words there because every time I see these quotes, I'm reminded of really just the journey that people can go on through an experience of working with Tate Exchange. And I'm humbled and honoured every time when people say things like that to us. This came from, this quote in particular is somebody that came from a programme that Flourishing Lives, that group that work with older people in London, had said back to us. And again, there's that sense of mattering, an understanding of how your story and experience exists within society more generally. The quotes that you've got here are from visitors to Tate Exchange, participants at Tate Exchange, and also some of the Tate Exchange and Tate staff as well. And we get a lot of staff coming to spend time at Tate Exchange during their days. And I really, people saying they're looking for a Tate Exchange effect when they go to other museums, like, where's your version of Tate Exchange? You need one, you should have one. And that actually the work that we do there for them justifies that role of the art museum as well. And then the voice and being heard, and to hear somebody say that, they could walk through the galleries and they might see themselves in the artwork on the walls, and increasingly so, which is fantastic, absolutely. But when they feel that actually Tate Exchange gives them that time to celebrate their presence, to be unapologetic in that, and for them to feel valued and visible, that's incredibly powerful and yes, humbling and an honour to feel that we had a part to play in that as well. And one of my favourite quotes as well is, oh yes, we're all part of the artwork here, which is about that changing idea of who is the artist and what is an artwork. And a social sculpture like this, they're all artists there. And that is an artwork in and of itself. So I'm going to talk to you now about a project called Tate Neighbors, and this puts kind of all of this that I've just talked about Tate Exchange into action and across Tate Modern as well. Tate Neighbors was a group that was convened by the artist Tanya Bruguera when she did her Turbine Hall commission with us back in 2018. And Tanya's work addresses questions of institutional power, political urgencies, in particular the status of the migrant and of migration as well. And her work moves between art and activism. It's not necessarily what art isn't necessarily what she sets out to make, but rather it's a frame for her to test against the reality and destabilising a situation symbolically, but also proposing solutions quite directly as well. That approach is something which of course art util, and I won't go into the detail of that now, but it translates as useful art. So it's drawing on artistic thinking and imagination to create and implement tactics that change how art is in society, how we are in society. So her Turbine Call Commission was the first one at Tate that had been so community driven, and in fact Tanya calls her commission the Tanya Bergera and Tate Neighbors Hyundai Tate Modern Commission. And what we see here on the floor is the uncovering through heat from your body on these heat sensitive pads, the uncovering of a photograph of a migrant who came to the UK, settled in Southwark, and is now actually where I am in Brighton, at the medical school here. And his name is Yusuf. And it was the suggestion in this of collective action, the symbolic marker, the catalyst for an institutional reflection on what it was meant to be, what it's like to be a neighbour, that then sort of joined her up to Tate Exchange as well. We just seemed to fit really well. And Tanya, that's when she said, right, well, Tate Modern as a neighbour, what does that mean? And convened then a group that called themselves, or came to call themselves, Tate Neighbors. They were really instrumental in the creative vision behind Tanya's Turbine Hall Commission. But actually they've gone on to work with us still and have a very critical role in Tate Modern and our development and how we think of ourselves and so they chose the name Neighbours as distinct to community. Community sort of had a shared belief system implicit in it, and a sense of homogeneity. But Neighbours has a sense of difference, and actually what they have in common is their neighbour aspect, their neighbour relation to Tate Modern, and of course vice versa. They focused on how an international institution like Tate Modern can learn from and adapt to its local community in a co-created process, and they operated very much from a purview of civic responsibility and selfless actions for themselves, for the public, and for Tate. And they came up with this, or they put this thinking into a manifesto that proposed this culture of connection and of a mutual commitment. And when people came into the Tate Modern building during the time of the installation, the public were asked, when they signed up to the Wi-Fi, they were also asked to sign up to this manifesto too. I'm going to come back to that. There's one key sentence in this: in times when thoughts and words are not enough, actions must become our common language. And this was the tipping point into the Tate Exchange programme, which ran a month long at the beginning of Tanya's commission. At this point, I was going to show you a film, and I won't do it in this talk, but I will share the link with the museum, so you can look at that then in your own time. And it is a film that is that gives that story of Tate Neighbors in their own voice as well. So the programme that they did at Tate Exchange ran for a month, and we asked visitors to think on neighbourly in action. It's for people on a journey through the space that took them from visitor at first in the space to then producer, and then into reflection, into action across a number of different social issues. And that was to provoke their own consideration of what it means for them to be a neighbour and what action they could take in the place where they. These actions were along the lines of one's voice, one's time, knowledge, money, and then actual physical action. It was the neighbours that came up with the idea to turn our boiler house building, which is the really iconic vision that you may have of the Tate Modern building, to rename it building. Excuse me. And this was after one of the local people, activists, who worked with local communities and had worked with that young migrant Yusuf. And had been working in the neighbourhood to Tate Modern for many, many years, and they wanted her name and her effort in the local community recognised, and so it is now not the boiler house; it is now the National Building. when, and Natalie speaks to this in the film, when we said to her, you've been voted to have your name to honour you and your work on the building, she did speak then about, she questioned her role as an activist. She asked herself about her own ethical standpoints in this, and was it okay to, you know, in this to have her name there, was she doing it for an ego or whatever? But she really did see actually that there's a symbolic aspect to having her name on a building, like there is in so many other buildings as well, that it actually represents all of those that are doing the kind of work that Natalie is doing, and it represents also an interjection of that into the institution. It's so hard to even begin to conclude on a project like this. It is still happening. The outputs from it, the outcomes from it are still happening. And we're very much still working with Tate Neighbors as well. They still, and it may be that we don't actually know the real impact of this program for many years to come, the impact on the institution for many years to come. This is a list, actually this is out of date now, I apologise, but this was a list of 16 key outcomes that came from that programme, and this was within 6 months of that programming finishing. So a hell of a lot of it had been achieved in that time, and real influence in terms of Tate governance, right down to how we programme, to who we programme with, to activism within the museum as well. A huge amount happens. And the two artworks, what we were doing at Tate Exchange and then the Tate Modern, the Turbine Hall intervention as well, they were really proposing an alternative understanding of value and our understanding of contribution, and celebrating Natalie Bell's work as empowering the local community was a way to comprehend Tate not just as an international institution and a keeper of our, you know, the beautiful treasures of our nation's art collection, but as a neighbour in itself that related specifically, you know, has local responsibilities too. And that's what I began to see as this effective agency of the work that happened at that time, and where it can add to that art and social change discourse as well. So art doesn't exist in isolation, nor is it an escape purely of itself. It actually presents us with an opportunity to act. And that's what lies behind that Tanya's ethos as well of art util, that art can be useful. It can evolve itself in debates around culture, history, politics, and also in the action of all of that in the present moment as well. So art util moves art from being an exemplification of something or an envisioning to actually be putting something of that into action as well. This then got me thinking and we're drawing to a close now, to give consideration of the museum as a relational object. And this is something which I've been looking at as well in my own research around social practice arts in place as too. So I've been musing on this as a consideration of the museum as a civic space of plural and diverse knowledges, as we talked about earlier with creative learning, and as an agent for its publics to navigate their way through their lived experience. This is what we tried to do at Tate Exchange, and also do within creative learning as well. And so here's the question: is the museum a relational object through which we can understand lived experience? And this comes here, the term relational, some of you may recognise this, comes from that concept of Brouillard's relational aesthetics theory as well. I won't go into the detail of that, but a definition of it, a set of artistic practices which take as their theoretical and practical point of departure the whole of human relations and their social context, rather than an independent and private space. So you see there the kind of breaking open of the museum, the permeability of the museum in that respect as well, in the potential of it to be a relational object. So with a practice like this, the art is a catalyst rather than the author of such work, and the artwork creates a social environment around it. And in this sense, I see the museum as the relational object, and it creating a social condition around it as well. But also with being permeable, that creation is a co-produced process. And so I see Tate Exchange as well. Artists at Tate Exchange use an art object whether that be something from the Tate collection or something that's created through a material way or a social encounter, as a means to talk through the matters of our contemporary lived experience. There's that relationality again. It then leads me to think of Tate Exchange socially engaged art practice as operating at this social interstitia, a space that's located within an overarching system, but also does suggest other possibilities for exchanges within and without the museum. It's concerned with provoking and sustaining individual and collective encounters. And thus, for me, Tate Exchange is a platform within Tate for that co-produced relational aspect of working and thinking. And that's to the public, to the civic, and to itself. And then that does lead me to thinking of the museum as that relational object really made large in very obvious sort of material ways. But that being a function of the museum to have that relationality. So the endeavour of the museum to be an object for our publics to navigate their way through their lived experience, which goes beyond the museum as a site of co-creation of knowledge, but that it's embodied and it is a relational experience that they have when they're with us on site. And the museum is a site where meaning is navigated, made and remade. And this again is that pluralistic process that we spoke about with creative learning. And museum also is a site for developing empathy and compassion, for exploring democracy, and as a site to figure out one's place in the world as well. So going back to that definition of relational, here we have the museum as a set of artistic practices and learning pedagogies on a common trajectory that via convivial modes of creative learning and social exchange with the public are concerned with human interactions, social context, and with collective meaning making. And so in short, the museum can be that relational object for the individual and for society as a whole. Its civic agency being a site and a knowledge base through in and throughout, which people can navigate and begin to make a sense of their lived experience as well. And I want to close by bringing that ponderance of mattering back to you. And I want to ask for you as the audience here, really what matters to you? What matters to your museum? And what needs to matter in your museum that may possibly not now? And I want to leave you with that ponderance, whilst I close then to Tate Neighbors and their manifesto and to read that for you. I cannot represent Tate Neighbors in their sense, but I can at least share their words with you. So we believe in a culture of connection, where we is used instead of us and them, a culture where everyone is accountable to each other, while creating and sustaining a safe and open space to be together. A prejudice-free zone, a sanctuary for all. We are committed to building a common language of civic responsibility and selfless action to care for one another. We all have some responsibility for the poor treatment of people around us and the hierarchies of power that divide us. We advocate for the rights for all to be different but equal. We believe that oppressed communities contribute culturally, socially and politically to the betterment of all. In times when thoughts and words are not enough, actions must become our common language. Thank you very much.